Hi, Michael Bettine here, once again, for the fourth part of my series running through all the various metal instruments I've collected over the years. And today, we are going to be looking at rare and unusual gongs from my collection, right here on It's Cuppa Time. As I said in the introduction, we are going to be looking at some rare and unusual gongs that I've collected over the years. And first we're going to be looking at B20 bronze gongs from UFIP in Italy and Zildjian in the United States. Now UFIP has a very long and glorious history. It started as a consortium of various small Italian cymbal and bell makers. UFIP actually stands for the Union of Italian Cymbal Makers. And they came together to pool their resources and form one larger company. And all the founding companies can trace their ancestry back hundreds of years as bell makers. So if anybody in the West knows how to work with B20 bell bronze, it's the people from UFIP. Now, it used to be mainly two groups. There was the Zonchi family and the Tronchi family. And they were the main two families involved in it. Over time, the Zonchis kind of left and disappeared. And it's mainly left to the Tronchi family to keep things going. So back in the early to mid 1970s, famed Italian percussionist composer Andrea Centazzo went to UFIP and convinced them that they should make all sorts of really amazing and crazy instruments. And they came up with a whole series of bronze instruments called ICTUS 75. And I happen to collect UFIP items. Back in the day, back in the 70s, I played a lot of them, but I could not afford them. Now I can afford them, so I've been buying various UFIP items over the years. And as I said, they really know how to make bell bronze. Their instruments are fantastically musical and sonorous. Unfortunately, the ICTUS 75 line only lasted maybe about 10 years or so. And then in the mid-80s, most of the instruments were dropped from the line. The only few that survived are the infamous ice bell, which Andrea and UFIP originated in the 70s, and everybody else has copied the bronze ice bell and the small Ogororo bell plates that you saw in my bell plate video. All the other fabulous instruments have been discontinued and are hard to come by nowadays. I think a big part of it is their very experimental sounds, their very unusual sounds, and the people who have them and the people I know who own them are experimental improvisational musicians like myself. And, you know, that's really where they seem to be residing now. Once in a while you'll find a piece on eBay or something, but that's very rare. So a little bit about the history. Again, Andrea Centazzo worked with UFIP to develop these instruments. And he modified a lot of different shapes and ideas. And one of the ideas they came up with was called the Tampang, which was a combination of a tam-tam or gong and a pang cymbal, a Chinese type cymbal. And I have 3 examples of them. They were made in basically 16s and a 24. I'm still looking for a 21 inch. If anybody has a lead on one or has one they want to sell, get in touch with me. So anyway, these are very unique. Now, Zeke and UFIP developed this rotocasting idea that they use in their cymbals, where they have a spinning mold and they pour in the bronze and it spins and supposedly gets the impurities to go to the edges of the metal and makes a better casting. These are not rotocast. These are from way before. These examples I have here are from the 70s. And this one even has the ICTUS 75 stamp on it. What these are sand cast. And as Andrea has told me, they just made them in the floor. They put the molds in the floor and they poured the bronze. They pulled it out and basically that's what we have. So a big difference we see in these, I'll get a little closer, you can see it has that sort of Chinese cymbal shape, is these are cast to shape. These were not hammered to shape. This was not hammered out of a flat disc. The cup was not put in and the edge was not turned up. These were cast to this particular shape. And if we can kind of get a look at the surface, it's hard to tell, but if you can see, it's very rough. And that's the actual outside of the metal and sort of the sand grain from the casting mold. Now you'll notice there is a hole in the center. Back in the day, drummers would buy these and think, oh, this is a great China cymbal, but this thing must weigh 8 pounds. Not a very good Chinese cymbal. Let me grab a stick here. Much too heavy for that. Now the reason they have this center hole is in order to put it on a lathe and to tune these, they would lathe the back side. The front is left untouched and the back is lathed. They did do hammering to these just to help tune them and that, but lathing the back, leaving the front raw. So these small tampangs are very heavy and more like a bell. And while they were cataloged as being 16 inches, this one is basically 16 inches. The other one is about 15 and 7/8. And again, that's because each one was individually cast from a sand mold. So they do vary. Let's just take a quick look at this other one. And they vary in how they're made too. Now this one doesn't have as pebbly, as grainy a surface. You can see the hammer marks more easily in it. It's been much more deeply hammered. But again, the back is all lathed and shiny, where the front is just left as the raw bronze as it comes out of the mold. And then they, smooth the edge off, and that is what we have, a tampang. So let's play these two smaller ones to give you an idea of the sound. I always use a harder mallet because they're quite heavy. But if we play it on the cup, we really get a nice sharp bell tone. And because they're heavy, they don't really get a crashy tone, but I can get it to open up some in a very harmonic sound. There's a lot of different notes in there, almost like a chord. And this one is a little more dissonant and crashy. So that's one thing when you went to buy them, or especially if you just ordered one from whoever was distributing UFIP in the US back then, either Gretsch or Atlas or somebody else. You never knew what you were getting. So if you could find one in a music store and actually play it, that was great, because you could say, oh, I like that sound, I can use it, or wow, that just isn't for me, because they all vary so much. Okay, here's the bigger one, the 24-inch. Again, it's a raw, rough surface, and you can see all the pebbly grain from the mold, and you can also see the areas where it's been hammered in rings, and then the back is lathed. This one gets a nice bell tone. But it also, this one gets a really amazing crash sound. It's a very aggressive crash that still keeps that bell tone in there. And I really like this one. Now we can play with a softer mallet. But the results are pretty much the same. These smaller ones don't really respond much. Just a quieter bell tone if you use a softer mallet. But they're really great with something like a wind gong mallet. Now we can try them with some marimba mallets. So they're capable of a lot of really interesting sounds, but nothing I would generally use for a gong meditation session, but I use these a lot when I'm playing either a solo percussion concert or playing improvised music with others. Very unique tones. Okay, let's look at the most unique one that I have from UFIP. That's right here. This I got from Andrea Centazzo, and it has the distinction of being the very first sheet metal gong UFIP ever made. He was speaking to them, and they were talking about the expense of making these cast bronze instruments, and and the difficulty, and he suggested they should try sheet metal like Paiste was doing. So this was made by Luigi Tronci, the patriarch of the family. And he and Andrea collaborated and hammered this out. And it's a dish shape. Let's take this one down here. It's just a basic dish shape, and this could be seen as being the forerunner to UFIP's Art 1 gongs. And it's It's, you know, it's hammered out, a slight rim, a slight curvature to it. It's not the best sounding gong, but when Andrea was selling off quite a bit of his collection, I thought it was important to buy this to save it from who knows what sort of oblivion. It would have ended up with somebody else. So I wanted it more as an historical instrument than as a really, you know, great sounding gong I would use. But we'll give it a play here. So this is about a 20-inch size, very aggressive crash, not refined at all. And I'm not sure, I believe this is just B8 bronze, like UFIP uses in some of their student cymbal lines. But it does have that oriental crash character, and this led UFIP to develop their whole art gong line, which at one time contained, I believe, 5 different types. The art one was the curved gong like this, and then they had some with a ridge and some with a center cup. Much more of a historical instrument than anything. I don't think I've ever used it musically, but it's nice to have, and especially with the history behind it. So that brings us to America in Zildjian. Once upon a time, the ICTUS Zildjian company did make gongs, and they made a few different types. They made what was called a Turkish gong, which is basically a flat gong with a bent rim that was hammered out. And those were quite popular in the 1970s, especially because it was difficult to get actual Chinese gongs back then. And then later in the 70s, they came out with what they called a gamelan gong. And this is the only one, in all my years of searching and everything, this is the only one I have ever seen in my life. It came up on a buy it now on eBay at something like 1 a.m. and I hit the button right away. But it has the cup like a gamelan gong would. And actually, it just looks like a huge cymbal. It's 24 inches. It looks like a giant cymbal. The profile is very flat. Oh, where a cymbal will be much more bowed. This is extremely flat. And you will notice there is no center hole in the cup. The Turkish style gongs did have a center hole so they could put it on a lathe and shave it down. This one does not, so I suspect they just clamped it into the lathe with pressure, and it's lathed on the front and back just like they did their cymbals. And it's a B20 alloy, the famous Zildjian alloy. There's a little faded logo on there you can see, but this is the Zildjian gamelan gong. I believe it came in 22 and 24 inch sizes. Now, thinking of a gamelan gong, it's a very heavy gong. It usually has a very deep rim and a very deep and focused sound. This does not. I was totally surprised when I got it. It sounds nothing like I would have expected. It's not really that heavy. I would have expected this to probably be twice as heavy, but it does have a great sound. It just sounds more like a wind gong than what I would think of as a gamelan gong. And it also does have that cymbal character to it. They can't really get away from making this sort of shape and not having it sound cymbal-like. So there you go, the Avidus Zildjian gamelan gong, made in Massachusetts in the mid-1970s. One of the rarest gongs out there, because I don't think they made very many of them. But you will not find anything like that. If you come across one and you're a collector, snap it up. They are so rare. I even contacted somebody at Zildjian and they were like, what? What is that? They had no idea the company ever made something like that. So there we go. B20 bronze, unusual and collectible instruments. And we'll look at a few other things. Let's take a look at something a bit different that you see more of nowadays, and that's gongs made out of steel. I have some different examples and sort of showing the evolution of steel gongs. Now, steel has been popular. Steve Huback over in Europe and other small gong makers have used steel a lot for two reasons. One, it's easily available, and two, it's rather inexpensive, especially compared to bronze. It's much harder to work. Steel is a very hard metal, and it takes a lot more brute force to hammer it and shape it, but it's been a popular metal nonetheless, especially for people who are first getting into gong making and kind of cutting their teeth on it. Sheet steel, cut out a circle, hammer it, and make a gong, and there's your first gong. So what a lot of makers do, because again, it's difficult to hammer steel. So this is an older custom tone. This is from, I believe, 2010. And this is made by Zeke Dauner, and his company was Custom Tone. I'm not sure if Zeke is still out there. He was making a lot of gongs and selling them on eBay. This is a very heavy steel gong. I'm not sure what type of steel it is. I know many gong makers use steel designated as 316L, a stainless alloy, but oftentimes people will use whatever they can find. And one thing a lot of these people do, again, because it's very difficult to hammer, is they'll have the rim, the edge, pressed into shape. You can kind of see this rim. There is no hammering. It's just bent over. So they can get a circular blank of metal, a big machine can come down and go and press the rim right in. And that's very popular among many of the people making steel and titanium gongs, is to have the edge pressed. Now this one does have some hammering in it. You can see hammering on the back. And you can also see where he did heat it up in the center and on the edge to sort of temper the metal and give it the darker look. And then he painted some Chinese characters on it. This is a heavy steel gong, rather primitive. This is some of his early work. Not the greatest of sounds. Sort of aggressive and all kind of bell-like, but not like the other bell-type gongs we've heard. Here's another one. This one has a little more character to it. but still not as sonorous as your typical bronze or nickel silver gong. But an intriguing sound nonetheless, and I use these a lot in improvised work, either solo or with other musicians, because they just have a unique sound. And this one here even has some scraping on the face, where this one is more plain. So he was working and experimenting, trying to get his craft up to another level. What I do like is playing this with a thin stick. I'll often use just a thin stick or a mallet handle. And I have a composition on my album Soundings, which uses one of these. And what I like is you can get sort of a steel drum character out of it. So it's very heavy, but it's got its own unique sound character. Let's just try the other one that way. So certainly nothing I would use for meditation, sound healing, but again, great for exploring different unique sounds for improvised music. So Zeke kept working. This is an example of a later one. Let's take a closer look at it. This one is very lightweight. I mean, there's nothing there. This is a 22-inch, and it weighs even less than a Peisty 22-inch. And on the back, he says it's a nickel chromium alloy. Shimmering Mirror is the name of this gong. And it's 0.036 is the gauge. You can see it's very shiny. And there's a lot of hammer marks on this one. There you go. But it's very thin. And one thing about steel, it doesn't, besides not having the sonority of a bronze or even a brass alloy or nickel silver, it really doesn't have a lot of power. It'll crash, but then it just dissipates right away. Doesn't have as much richness as a nickel silver gong. It does have some nice lows. So he refined his technique more. This one has an actual hammered edge to it. Much richer and better sound than the heavy gongs. And I have one more from Custom Tone. This is a small one that I got at the same time as that one. And this says The Mirror, it's called. And this is 0.048 as far as the thickness. And it's a nice little gong. It's a very reflective mirror face. Has a very distinctive tone. Again, not at all like nickel silver or bronze. Kind of a boing sort of character to it. But a very unique sound. Stainless steel. So those are from, I believe, 2012, those two, and the heavy ones are from 2010 or 2011. So let's look at some more recent steel gongs. These are from Italy, from Grotta Sonora. I got this one, which is a 26-inch deep gong, the second one they made. And I got this at the Gong Summit in 2019. And everybody brought tons of big gongs. Sean Acito and Grotta Sonora brought a lot of big gongs. Steve Weiss Music had big gongs there. And I was looking for something smaller. And I asked Madhava from Grotta Sonora, who makes these, I said, didn't you bring some smaller gongs? Because I was there the day before and helped unload all the trucks, and I thought I had seen some smaller ones. And he said, oh, we've got those in the entranceway of the resort we were staying at. So he took me up there, and I played one and went, that's okay. Put this one on the stand, played it, and it was like, I'll buy this because it had such a unique sound to it. It's steel, it has a pressed edge, and it does have hammering here, but this edge is basically pressed in, and then there's hammering. And they put some really fantastic colors on it. And this one just has a very unique sound with a lot of beats to it. And it's very sensitive. It's so easy to overplay. So if I hit a Paiste gong or a Chow gong, and then I go to this one, I have to remember to ease up and not play it so hard. Those tones, that back, or it's wah, wah, wah. Very unique. Hit it aggressively, it's too much. It opens up way too much. If you hit it just right, you get a very pleasant, relaxing tone that fades out, and you've got the beats in there. That is from Grotta Sonora in Italy from 3 years ago. And then this year, I got another one of their gongs. This is a heavier steel gong. This is 19 inches. This is one of their handheld gongs. And you can see it has fantastic colors on it on the front. And the back has some interesting designs and all. It's fairly flat. Again, I would say this is probably pressed with some hammering, or maybe it's just all hammered on the edge. There's no hammering in the center, mainly on the edge to bend it over some. Has an intriguing sound. contrasting tone. But one thing you'll probably noticed about the steel gongs is they're more one-dimensional than a bronze or nickel silver gong. It will have more richness in the sound, more highs, more mids, more lows. These just tend to be the note with a little bit of overtones. So there you go, steel gongs, another option out there. There's a lot of companies making them out of steel now, and they keep improving. They keep getting better sounds, better gongs. So I'm excited to see where the future will lead with companies like Grotta Sonora, WAM, and some of the others that are mainly working with steel. And they're also branching out now into other metals, bronze and things like that. So I'm excited. I think the future has a lot to hold for all of us people interested in gongs. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next episode of It's Cuppa Time.